Hello, this is going to be a two-part video on making this stained glass box. First part is the box, the second part will be the lid. This first clip here is me copper foiling the beveled glass sides of the box. There are 12 boxes that I'm making in this project, and the foil I'm using here is a black background because I'll be patining the copper foil black so that it'll match well. You want to try to get this on as centered as you can as you work your way around the piece and have a slight overlap. When you overlap, it's important that the pieces line up exactly right side to side. If not, you actually can trim them with a little razor knife. Here I am carefully folding the edges over the sides. In the corners, I pinch it carefully and miter it over. You want to burnish the copper foil when you're done. Make sure it's nice and tight to the glass. That's not going to come off. Here I'm just using the back of my little marker to do that. Probably the hardest part of this whole process is getting the paper backing started on the copper foil here. Just a slightly different angle of the same thing. You want to try to not touch the adhesive with your fingers if you can, and try not to lift it up and reattach it too often in the process. You start losing the stickiness of the adhesive. Here's a close-up of one of the pieces here, showing nice and burnished down and even all the way across. Should help make a good solder joint. There's all 50 pieces ready to go. 12 boxes, 4 pieces each, that's 48. So I got a couple of spares. Here's part of the aftermath of the process. Okay, cutting the mirrors is going to be the next step. These boxes are going to be approximately 4 inches square, and just measuring things out. I actually had the mirror from a back of a door that wasn't being used anymore, so I was able to repurpose the mirror, which is a nice way to save money. If only I could work this fast as I do it. You can see the pile of mirrors growing in the top right corner of the video as I work it. I'm cutting on the back of a 2x2 ceiling tile is where I seem to be doing most of my work lately. And I'm going to be copper foiling the mirrors now. These old eyes need a little help, so I use a magnifying light that I got at Harbor Freight. Of course, this is the same process here as in when I did the beveled glass sides. Just trying to keep it centered. Try not to lift it up too often in the process. I usually go for about a 1/4 inch overlap, is pretty typical. I know some people like to just feed it off the roll and then wrap it around and cut it off when they're done. I prefer to cut the piece to the right size and then wrap it around. And burnishing the sides, and there are the pieces, the mirrored bottoms. Made up a small little jig to try to work the corners here in the soldering. A little right angle corner to help me keep the pieces in alignment. I'm trying to start with just a quick tack and do 2 corners this way, and then I'll join the square. Didn't always want to cooperate with me. I'm new to the stained glass world. This is only about my 5th piece. I am actually a 30-year woodworker, which is where the idea for these jigs came up. You can see the little jig I made to try to hold pieces in place to see if it works or not, if it wants to work for me. I think I kind of gave up on that angle for tacking purposes. They're still pretty flexible when they're tacked. So once I got them tacked, then I could go back to the jig and put a full bead of solder in. Come on, work with me here. Stick. Now you see it holds in position, and I can work on laying a full bead of solder in. I actually did this in 2 parts. Here I'm more concerned with just getting a fairly even coat, but not worrying about how much solder's on it to make a nice rounded edge. It's actually fairly flat at this point, but it locks it into position much better. I go back later and do the more decorative solder edge to give it a more rounded look on the corners. These are Christmas gifts for all the women in my family. Moms, daughters, nieces, mother-in-laws. I used the back of this jig to give me a little higher angle. It seemed to make it a little easier to hold the soldering iron down. It's amazing how much solder these corners use. You don't want the corners overlapping. You actually want them kind of the edges just touching, so it leaves kind of a 45-degree opening, 9-degree opening for the solder to fit into. And you can see the pile of frames getting larger as I work through this process. Here I did first mirror attachment. I was having fun trying to figure out how to hold this in position. And I tried to use another piece of glass which is the same height to help hold the centers up. Again, you don't want the mirror bottom overlapping the edges. You want them to come in just meeting the edge, so you got that place for the solder to fit, and hopefully not too much of a gap that the solder wants to fall through. I start off with a tacking operation. I went back and filled in here, just using a couple of the little wooden wedges that I cut to hold an angle. You want to try to keep each surface nice and horizontal and give nowhere for the solder for gravity to take effect and have the solder come rolling down your joint. So here is holding it in a more natural position here. That seemed to work fine. Here I'm just tinning the exposed foil on the bottom of the seam. I'm going to have little felt feet on the bottom, so I want to keep that fairly flat there. And again, working on the rest of the tinning. It's all about holding it at the right angle so the solder wants to flow on you properly and not tilt down. You don't need much solder when you're doing the tinning here, or so I learned watching from other people's videos. These bottom corners are probably the hardest for me to get flowing right. I'm not sure if my flux was too much flux. It was splattering a little bit on me. And the reflection of the mirror on the bottom makes it look quite interesting. And again, back to a good angle with my little jig here to hold things right as I work through the tinning, covering all the copper with a coat of solder. So I came up with an idea to make it easier for me to hold the glass. It turns out that my glass is 1 3/4 inches and 1.5 inches, and the 2x4 is 1.5 inches, so I just cut a small block to fit in. And here's what they look like after they're done. So this is part 1 of the operation. Once I'm all done, I'll take a Sharpie and sign and date the bottom of the boxes. Please join me for part 2, which will be the stained glass lid. Thank you for your time. Hope you enjoyed it.